I'm going to mention a name. I just want you to think of the first thing that pops into your mind. I want you to tell me what it is. All right, here we go. Ebenezer.
Scrooge.
Everybody, for some reason, when they hear the name Ebenezer, they of course think of the star of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge. The very name of Ebenezer brings to mind someone who is an old, stingy curmudgeon who is selfish and hates Christmas and hates everybody else pretty much. But on the other hand, how many of you really know somebody named Ebenezer? I've never known any Ebenezers. Some Elmers, some Elroys, but no Ebenezers. Despite the Scrooge legacy, the name Ebenezer really has a glorious legacy attached to it. In fact, the hymn that we're going to close our worship service in just a little bit has a somewhat of a strange line in that hymn that it reads this way: "Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come." Perhaps maybe you have sung that song for years and you really never stopped and wondered, well, what is an Ebenezer and what does it mean to raise it up? Well, from that one line in that hymn, the name Ebenezer, in our lesson for today comes from a single Old Testament verse. And it's my hope that after our time together here today, whenever you are overwhelmed by life, whenever you are tempted to give up in discouragement, whenever you're depressed, when the days are dark, you will repeat that strange sounding name to yourself, Ebenezer, maybe even aloud. People might think you crazy, but who cares? We don't know what people think about us. But I guarantee you, if you can think on the true meaning of Ebenezer and believe, then your life won't be the same. Let me read you the Old Testament verse, and then I'll explain a little bit of the story behind it. It comes from 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. "Samuel then took a large stone and placed it between the towns of Mizpah and Jeshanah. He named it Ebenezer, which means the stone of help. For he said, up to this point, the Lord has helped us." Now, it was over 1,100 years before the time of Christ. The people of Israel had conquered much of the Promised Land. It hadn't been an easy task. The infant nation was, at this point, still surrounded by a lot of powerful enemies. In fact, 20 years before the event of raising this Ebenezer, one of the darkest days in ancient Israel took place. In a single day, Israel not only suffered a horrible military defeat, but they also lost the Ark of the Covenant into enemy hands. The Ark of the Covenant was a place of God's presence among them. It was the worst disaster imaginable. Israel, now they soon regained the Ark, but nothing was the same after that. The terrible memory of that dark and awful day would continue to discourage the nation for an entire generation. 20 years later, Samuel, the great prophet of the nation, calls a meeting of the nation's leaders. And he tells them if they want to experience the blessings of God once again, they need to turn their faith back to God. Yes, times have been hard, but they would never be any better until they turned to God. That sounds like some pretty good advice for our country today. And then the entire nation of Israel responded positively at Mizpah. The nation gathered in prayer, not just a few. It says the nation gathered in prayer, seeking God's blessings again. And just that moment, though, the Philistine army, the dreaded enemy of the Israelites, they saw an opportunity to attack while Saul and the leaders and all the warriors were in prayer together. But Samuel learns of the plan, and the soldiers form battle lines, and the Philistines are turned back in defeat, and it's a great victory for Israel. And to mark this occasion of this great military victory and the day of their great return to faith in God, Samuel raises up a memorial marker. From that day on, whoever saw the marker would be reminded of the great events of that day. Samuel gave the marker a name. He called it Ebenezer, a term that meant the help of the Lord. Thus far, the Lord helped us, he said. Like ancient Israel, we are assembled here today in somewhat of a memorial service. We're not going to raise stone pillars or monuments, but many of you have placed flowers on grave sites of loved ones today. Now, we haven't come through 20 years of spiritual despair or survived a great military battle this year, but many of you have been through a lot of trials and tribulations this year. Many of you have lost dear loved ones. Many of you have suffered job losses. Many of you have suffered illness, financial setbacks. Today we could use a memorial like Samuel's. It wasn't a memorial of their hard time or of their more recent victories. It was a memorial to God's faithfulness to His people. Here we raise our Ebenezer. Thus far the Lord has helped us. That's a reminder that we can always use. Israel didn't need a memorial to the tough times that they had been through. They had all experienced it. You don't need a memorial to your loss or your grief. Some things you will never forget. Those ancient Israelites weren't likely to forget the 20 years of discouragement that they had come through. Memory is an amazing thing. Experts will tell you that we never really forget anything. Every experience, both good and bad and anywhere in between, is filed away somewhere in our brains. Now, we might forget where we put it, but it's filed in there somewhere. Sometimes when things happen that are just too painful for us to deal with, our brain, thanks to God, knows exactly what to do. It kind of locks that part away for a while until we're at a point in our life when we can deal with it. Some things are just too painful when you're experiencing them. I have dealt at the police department with victims of horrible accidents or of horrible crimes and terrible tragedies, and they literally have little or no recollection of the event itself, just some of the aftermath. Back in the beginning of the Iraqi War, doctors say that Private Jessica Lynch, the young soldier who was wounded and captured and abused for all those days early on in the war, that she had no recollection of the time between her capture and her rescue. And that's a very good thing, I would imagine. It is a gift of God that sometimes the memories of our hardest times are those memories that fade the quickest. You know, I was thinking as I was putting this together, bad memories of growing up. I don't really remember any. I know I got spankings, but I don't ever remember them. But I can remember my daddy telling me every night that he loved me and that Jesus loved me more. We have a way of pushing the bad things out and the good things coming to the light. We never really forget the most important things in our life. Even when our memories begin to grow dim, there are a lot of memorials to bring back those things for us. You ever seen somebody who's suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia, and they're reliving a scene from their early life, and it's usually when their family is all together and they're reliving good times, not bad times. Our brains are wired in such a wonderful way. God has made us that way that those memories can be brought to the forefront of our minds even when we can't remember who we are or where we're at. God has blessed us with ways of dealing with loss as well. As time passes after the death of a loved one, we find that we have a way of forgetting some of those hard days. The grief, sure, little by little, is not as deep, not as heavy. The tears don't come as quickly as they once did. But we don't forget our loved one, do we? We never forget those that we love. We have plenty of memorials to remind us of the ones that we love but are no longer with us. Of course, there is the cemetery marker that we put flowers on. It might be a simple stone monument with just a few words, but it represents something a lot more, a life that was lived and a love that will last forever. But the stone markers in the cemetery pales in comparison with other memorials that we have of our loved ones. Conversations that we can recall, hugs, special places that we spent time together, holiday traditions. They all take on a specialness that will continue to recall our loved ones in our memory for years and years to come. we also know that our memorials are not just about the places of grief. Most of the things that are most meaningful to us are the living places. Our homes. Places we went on vacation together, the beach or the mountains or the lake. Even this very church building that we're gathered in today brings back memories for a lot of folks. Birthdays, anniversaries, special events will never again just be days on a calendar. They're memorials of a life shared. The people and friends that were part of our loved ones' lives become memorial for us too. You know, Israel didn't need a memorial to remind them of what they had been through any more than you or I need a memorial to remind us of loved ones that are gone on. We remember well. But they did need a special reminder of something that can too easily get lost in the darkness of this world. That was the memorial that Samuel raised before them that day. And the hymn says it very well. Here I raise mine Ebenezer. Hither by thy help I've come. The memories of the hard times remain and then they fade. But the memory of God's faithfulness should always be fresh. That was Samuel's challenge to the people. He wanted his people not only to remember what they had been through, he wanted them to never forget that it was the Lord who had seen them through that. And that's my call for us today. May our memorials today not just be to a loved one who is missed, or to the good old days of days gone by that we remember. May our memorial be to God Almighty, whose greatness and goodness has sustained us every step of the way. Through good times, through lean times, through battles, through wars, through droughts, through hardships, through times of gain and times of loss. And I remind you that He will do the same in the future. That was why that memorial was named Ebenezer. Thus far the Lord has helped us. How many of you here know beyond the shadow of a doubt that God has helped you through dark times? I know it. I'm absolutely certain of it. I know that it is His peace and His strength that keeps you and me going in those dark days. I know that. God has helped you. He's been there for you in the good times. He's been there for you in the bad times. He gave you the memories that you have of the good old days of loved ones gone. He granted you laughter and joy. God was helping you share those good times, and He helps you remember those as well. God was with you in the hard times. You know, those dark days when it really is only by His hand that you feel like you can keep going. God was the one who sent those friends and neighbors with the kind words at just the right time, with the warm hugs when they were needed most. It was God that gave you strength you needed when you needed it before you even knew that you needed it, if that makes any sense at all. God was there when you didn't think you could handle one more disappointment, and then the phone rings. And you did handle it with God's help. Here we raise our Ebenezer. Thus far, God has helped us. What a great joy it is, and truly knowing that God is always with us. He's always our strength, always our sustainer. To know that sometimes that, yes, God does calm the storms in our lives, but at other times He lets the storm rage on and He holds us and keeps us still in His presence. Either way, we can say, thus far the Lord has helped us. The psalmist says it this way in Psalm 121. I lift mine eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, He who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore. Or if you want it, in modern day poetry, Annie Johnson Flint worded this truth. God hath not promised skies always blue, flower-strewn pathways all our lives through. God has not promised sun without rain, joy without sorrow, peace without pain. But God has promised strength for the day, rest for the labor, light for the way, grace for the trials, help from above, unfailing sympathy, and His undying love. Here we raise our Ebenezer. Hither by thy help we've come. When I was in high school, I worked for the American Legion and the VFW from all around North and South Carolina. And it was my job to travel and go play taps at military funerals. That was before they had the recorded stuff. Everything was done live. Now, if you've ever been in the military, you know that taps is not just about funeral. When else do they play taps? Every evening, every night, they play taps. Now, everybody knows the tune of taps, but not many know that there are words to that song. When you hear the words, it becomes more than that funeral song that's played at a military funeral. It's a comfort. It's really a reminder that God has seen you through another day. Day is done, dawn the sun, from the lakes, from the hills, from the sky, all is well, safely rest, God is nigh. Didn't know that, did you? So you learned something today. God is always with us. With all that's going on in the world, wars, that's plural, political unrest, epic violence, atrocities in every corner of the globe, natural disasters of epic proportion, prophecies being fulfilled. Folks, if there ever was a time that we need to remind ourselves of the reason that Providence Church has endured for 227 years, that time is now. And the reason is because through thick and thin, good, bad, plenty and want, God Almighty has seen us through it. Hither by His help we have come. Not once has God turned His back on us. Never abandoned us. Never left us alone in this dark world trying to scratch and find our own way. Even when we trudged through the valley of the shadow of death, 6 times this year with loved ones, God never left our side. He will be with us, I remind you, in the future. Whatever the future may bring, and we don't know what's going to happen. The world is a pretty volatile place right now. We don't know what's going to happen, but I can promise you this, nothing will catch our God by surprise. He will be with us in the future. That's a precious promise that we must memorialize for the next generation and the one after that if the world carries that on. Here we raise our Ebenezer. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. I preached a sermon kind of like this, along these same lines, on Memorial Sunday in 2007. 2007. That was my 3rd year here. Didn't know if I'd be back for more than that. I went and I found down at the creek nothing special. Just a rock. But that Sunday, we set it up here, and it stayed at this altar until we started the renovation. Here we raise our Ebenezer. Something to remind us of God's goodness. What's gone on since then? There have been loved ones die, babies born. Times of financial hardship that we didn't know if we would get through, but the Lord saw us through. Times of unemployment where a large portion of the congregation was without jobs. God saw us through. Even through a remodeling process and an adding on process. I heard all kinds of horror stories. And I want you to know that when this rock left this altar, it went to our breezeway. It's been there ever since. And the girls think it's just, well, now we're going to have to find another place to hide our spare key because they just told her secret. They thought it was just a place to hide our spare key, but for me, every day when I walk out the door, I see it. And it reminds me. You know, I'm not bragging because it has nothing to do with me. I'm full of faults, full of failures. But I look back through the church history every now and then and remind myself how blessed I am to have been here this long. I think the next longest serving pastor was here for 5 years. 8. I'll start my 14th year in June. Hither by His help that I've been able to be here. Hither by His help y'all been able to stand me. It's just a rock. But the rainbow is just a rainbow. Right? Here we raise our Ebenezer. We praise God for His help in the past. We praise Him for His sustaining presence here today. And we beg Him for His help, knowing that He will be there for us tomorrow. Let's stand and sing our closing hymn.